For the most part, the Seahawks injury report looking pretty good heading into Sunday's game against the Commanders, but could they be missing a key piece in the middle of their defense? We'll be breaking it all down in our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in Snoqualmie, Washington, or Aberystwyth, Wales. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're only a couple days away from a Week 10 battle against the Commanders. What do the Seahawks need to do to get back in the win column and improve to 6-3? We'll have our keys to victory on offense and defense, our picks to click, and of course our game predictions on a jam-packed Blue Friday episode brought your way by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Now for your lead story here on our Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Even though the Seahawks were beat up pretty bad on the scoreboard last week in Baltimore, gave up almost 300 rushing yards, the injury report's looking pretty solid going into Friday. With that being said, there are a couple big names that missed practice yesterday. DK Metcalf, this is becoming a weekly thing, sitting out on Thursday. I would anticipate he's going to play. They're just giving him his middle of the week rest day with that hip issue that looks like it's going to be a problem for him for most of the season, if not the rest of the season. And Jordyn Brooks, the standout linebacker, he has missed both practices so far this week with a hamstring issue. That was not an injury that was on the report last week, so it clearly happened in Baltimore. And I thought he was dealing with some cramps during the game in the second half, but maybe he was dealing with a hamstring injury and playing through it. And I think that does at least create a little bit of question about his availability for this weekend, Nick.
Yeah, I'm surprised no one has a neck strain from watching the Ravens go back and forth across the field last week. But so Jordyn Brooks is certainly the new noteworthy one here. You immediately turn to if you can't go Devin Bush, who he was brought in originally because it was looking like perhaps Jordyn Brooks wasn't going to make it to the start of the season with that ACL injury, but he must have got some of that Aaron Rodgers medicine going on because he healed up real quick and had not only been back but been just as good, if not better than ever, at the linebacker position. So if he might be playing sore if he plays, not 100%, and if he tries to get a go of it and he can't, Devin Bush, John Radigan going to have to kind of spot start there, and I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more of Devin Bush if that happens. Just kind of a wait, like what do we have here kind of thing, and especially as we go down not the home stretch quite yet, but when the rubber's going to start meeting the road here with the schedule, with the standings, and so you got to have the depth, and Devin Bush might turn out to be a key part of that. So I'd like to see a bit more of what you have there. If Jordyn Brooks can't go, obviously he's the best option if he can go. So with that, along with the offensive line, it's looking like Anthony Bradford. He's improved a bit from last week, but might not get out there. So a rare Corbin, perhaps repeats rotation along the offensive line as well.
Yeah, that would be the second time in 9 games, in a sequence of 9 games. It would be the second time that they've had the same offensive line for back-to-back games. That's how many injuries that they have had and guys in and out of the lineup. And it's going to change hopefully next week, and this for an exciting reason, getting Abraham Lucas back. But they did not have him return to practice this week, and who knows, he might need a couple weeks of practice before he's ready to play in a game. So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves there, but they are going to have the same starting offensive line most likely for a second straight week. That is a big deal. As far as Jordyn Brooks, I think this is something that is worth noting here. The Commanders have the highest pass rate on first down in the entire NFL. They love to air it out with Sam Howell and the receivers that they have. This is really a passing-heavy football team. So I'm wondering, Could this be a game where Jordyn Brooks is active, but he doesn't have to play more than 60% of the snaps because they're playing a lot of dime sets to try to withstand the Commanders' passing arsenal? So that might be something else that's kind of a side note here to go with that injury. And maybe they can afford to have him sit out this week if he's not 100% because, hey, you're not going to be on the field for a large chunk of the plays anyway. We're planning to go a lot of nickel and dime. And if that's the case, Devin Bush is athletic. You can have him play as that second linebacker, and he can handle those duties. So I do think that is the one injury that is worth noting here. I do think it's ironic that there's a guy on the injury list with a tooth injury. Jaron Reed did not practice on Wednesday, but luckily he was a full participant on Thursday. So didn't get his teeth completely kicked in by the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday. And you've got a number of other players that sat out of practice. Jackson Smith and Jigba with a hip issue. Ken Walker III with his chest. Jamal Adams, they're going to be taking it easy with him during the rest of the season because of the injury he's coming back from. So they're going to give him practice time off as well. Tyler Lockett practicing in full. And Derek Hall, that is a big one with his shoulder issue, practicing in full because we saw what happened last week when the Seahawks had to play Frank Clark and Darrell Taylor at the same time together. And I don't think the Seahawks, maybe in this game it'll be okay because the Commanders, again, are a pass-heavy football team. But I could see Washington turn a new leaf and try to run the ball after what they saw last week against the Ravens. So having Derek Hall healthy, at least healthy enough to play, I think would be a big deal for the Seahawks going into this game. But generally, most of the injury news here is pretty good with a lot of these players being full participants on Thursday, and barring setbacks, it looks like the Seahawks should be really close to full strength, with Brooks being that one big name that potentially could be sitting out this weekend.
Yeah, the difference in the scoreboard doesn't reflect the results on the injury report, thank goodness. So the Seahawks do come out pretty healthy from a pretty, it's emotional injuries mostly. Ego and pride was the biggest injury report. You can't have that on the, Nick Lee questionable pride. You can't really have that on the injury report. So that's the only thing. Hopefully that confidence, that pride is back to a full participant as well.
Yeah, we don't see anybody on the injury report with broken confidence or self-esteem issues. Those aren't going to show up. But I guess the rest days might be close enough for that, with a lot of guys getting those rest days this week. But nonetheless, the other big storyline that has yet to be addressed here, DJ Dallas is on the injury report. He banged up his shoulder in that game against the Ravens, exited in the second half, but he's been limited this week, was bouncing around, according to Pete Carroll. Knowing DJ Dallas as well as I do, he's going to be a hard guy to get off the field. But Kenny McIntosh, the Seahawks have to make a decision by this weekend with him. He's at the end of his 21-day window returning from injured reserve. If they don't put him on the 53-man roster, he goes back to injured reserve and he's lost for the season. They have an open roster spot, so I'm expecting that move is going to happen by Saturday afternoon, that Kenny McIntosh is going to be activated, whether DJ Dallas is available this weekend or not. I would anticipate that they're not going to risk Kenny McIntosh being done for the year when they've had him practicing for the last couple of weeks. So that's another name to keep a close eye on. Dareke Young also returning to practice. Pete Carroll said he might be ready this weekend. You've got one roster spot. So there's going to be some decisions to make there for the Seahawks. And DJ Dallas, he's practicing, but if he's not fully healthy, maybe that's an injured reserve opportunity there, and they'll just swap running backs. There could be some dominoes that drop here in the next 24 hours leading up to this football game. Up next, speaking of that football game against the Commanders, it's time to go through our keys to victory on offense and defense. What do the Seahawks have to do to get that bad taste out of their mouth from Baltimore and get back in the win column against a better than advertised Washington squad? We'll be breaking those keys down coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You don't have to battle against thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. You are picking more than or less than on a 2 to 6 player stat projection, and you can watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. And the really fun thing right now, with basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you could have Geno Smith and Stephon Curry with a 15.5 combo of 3-pointers made and touchdowns. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Adam Schultz? You can find those in the community plays under the promos tab in the app to view entries of some of the biggest names in Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks is an absolute blast each week, and it's an easy way to enjoy your daily fantasy without the hassle and land quick winnings. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. We spend a lot of time together here on this podcast. We get fired up on the wins and losses, who starts, who sits. I'm thankful for that connection we have here on Locked On Seahawks. And today I want to chat to be a little bit more personal. Whether you're on an extended travel, bracing for a major weather event, or limited by yet another supply shortage, you are covered thanks to our partners at Jase Medical. Life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications can be ordered in a 1-year supply, even ED generics such as Cialis and Viagra prescriptions. Go online right now at jasemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. A verified customer had this to say about Jase: I am thankful for this service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half. I ordered most of my daily meds with a year's supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you love would love to get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily med, go to jasemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for this show by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Don't forget, coming up a couple hours after the final whistle, Seahawks and Commanders on Sunday, we'll have our weekly post-game show, game balls and offense, defense, special teams, 3 up, 3 down, key storylines coming out of the game, and much more. You won't want to miss it. Speaking of that game coming up on Sunday, this is a game with plenty of playoff implications, even though it's only week 10. The Commanders, for being a team that was a seller at the trade down line, dealing away Chase Young and Montez Sweat in separate deals to get a second and a third round pick in next year's draft, Nick, they're 4-5. They're just a game under 500. They're only a game out of the final wild card spot in the NFC too. And this is one of those teams that, even though they traded a couple good players away on defense hasn't been a strength for this team anyway. The offense has been what is carrying them. So looking towards this game from a Seahawks perspective, Seattle wants to get that 6th win, stay in place with the 49ers in the NFC West in the wild card race. This is a crucial game for both teams, more so for Washington from a standing standpoint. But from the Seahawks perspective on offense, what's the first thing that jumps out to you against this Commanders defense that has underachieved all season, even before they dealt away a couple players? How do you think the Seahawks have to attack this Commanders team to win this football game?
Well, first of all, I did tweet about this earlier in the week that this actually is a low-key important game in the standings with, of course you want to keep pace in the NFC West, but as for tiebreaker NFC wildcard scenarios, you want to keep the Commanders at arm's length. And this is a game that you can do that. So my first thing I'm looking at, I was listening to a lot of radio today. I went on a few drives for work and hours on the car. And the thing that I kind of gathered from just listening to some data, some analysis is the play action pass. I think the Seahawks offense had like a Mufasa in the clouds moment as the Raven game ended. Remember who you are. And that's being a physical football team. Remember, Shane Waldron, remember who you are and where you came from. And that is, RAM system, play action. And we just haven't seen that. I know you've been pounding anything in sight, inanimate objects, about the play action pass. And I think that this come to Mufasa moment for the Seahawks play action passing game. And, hopefully the Ravens game was like a smack on the head from Rafiki's staff on Simba. And you get back to that, because if you look at the numbers, per Pro Football Focus, the passing grades in play action passing scenarios, Geno Smith is 3rd in the NFL after Matthew Stafford and Tua Tagovailoa. The 3rd quarterback in passing grade for play action pass per Pro Football Focus is Geno Smith. He's 2nd in yards per attempt and number 1 in those scenarios in completion percentage. And then you go to versus no play action pass, just straight drop back. He is 20th in passing grade, 21st in yards per attempt, and 23rd in completion percentage. So it's a striking difference in play action pass versus drop back. And He's got 66 passing attempts on play action pass this year. That's about 8.3 per game. I want to see 10. I want to see double digit. I want to see 10 at least play action passing attempts, because the difference there is just striking.
Yeah, and there's a lot of arguments out there whether or not play action needs a good run game. And there's some data out there that suggests not so much. Now, I'm still a subscriber that it's much easier for a defender to be able to get downhill and be able to get after the run and be able to diagnose the pass and not take the run seriously when you don't run the football effectively. So I do think that it's still something Seattle's going to they're going to have to be able to run the football in this game for that play action to work. And in particular, I mentioned Chase Young and Montez Sweat. They're in different uniforms now. Chase Young in San Francisco, Montez Sweat playing in Chicago. Those were two of Washington's best defensive players, and they've still got a few decent backups that are now starters on the outside, but this feels like a game where the Seahawks should be able to find some success testing the edge with their run game. And that's not just with running backs. That could be a few jet sweeps thrown in there, reverses, end arounds. But you need to test the edges with those two players no longer being there, and now you're playing backups as starters. That feels like an area that the Seahawks can have success. And if you can get some big runs off tackle against this football team, you can have some real fun with play fakes and play action off of similar looks, and then get some of those throws downfield against a defense that has given up the third most passing yardage in the entire NFL this season, and they have an explosive rate in the top 5. So they have given up a ton of explosive plays in that secondary. If you can get that run game going, particularly off edge, and feed it into the play action, this is a game that I think you can absolutely strike a bunch of points on the scoreboard and maybe get this offense rolling a little bit when they've been so inconsistent up to this point.
And really, the Commanders, I read somewhere, I think they've allowed 22 pass plays of at least 25 yards or more. That's the second most in the NFL. So the play action pass can really give you an opportunity for those explosive plays, especially if you have an effective run game. And then the third key, I think, can also feed into all those, and that's the tight end usage. I mean, just looking at the targeting rates for tight ends, especially Noah Fant specifically, he has 6 targets in the last 4 games. 6 targets in 4 games for Noah Fant, who I think can be one of the better dynamic tight ends the Seahawks have had since Jimmy Graham, honestly, like just the physical tools and talent. And they just don't utilize him the way. It's maddening. And I know we have been just pounding the table as well on this, but the tight end usage has got to be there. And I think that can naturally progress that way with an effective run game and an effective play action pass.
Yeah, Washington has given up 5 touchdowns to tight ends this year. That is tied for the most in the NFL. They're in the middle of the pack for receptions and receiving yards allowed, but they have certainly been vulnerable to tight ends in the red zone. That has been a problem for this Washington defense, and their safeties don't really match up well against tight ends. And so this feels like a game where you can get Colby Parkinson, Noah Fant, Will Dissly. I want to see Will Dissly just get a target. I mean, I don't understand the usage on that point. We talked about this on a show earlier this week on Wednesday, how the Seahawks can help Geno Smith and this offensive line. Well, Will Dissly played 11 plays last week. Like, you need to have him on the field. You got to get these tight ends involved in general. So this is a game that would be really nice to see that happen. Now, flipping the script, as I mentioned, this Commanders offense, they've had a few games where they've gone AWOL, but they've also had several games where they have lit up scoreboards, and they almost beat Philadelphia, not just once, but twice. They were on the doorstep of beating the Eagles, and they put up a ton of points against a pretty darn good Eagles defense. So looking at Washington in this pass-happy offense, Nick, what do you see as the biggest key for the Seahawks defensively going in this game if they want to get win number 6?
Speaking of pounding inanimate objects, my dad with the Commanders as an Eagles fan, he can't stand them because they're so pesky with the Eagles. And that's been their calling card this year. And really it comes down to Sam Howell. What a player he has become, and just a playmaker, just kind of I don't know if Baker Mayfield's a fair comparison for me, but he's just got that gunslinger, zero fear. And that kind of scares me as a defense. And right now he's tied for the 3rd most completions of at least 20 yards, 10th in passer rating when throwing over 20 yards. And I think the Seahawks just should not even give him a chance to look downfield that far and just hound him, pressure him, because the Commanders have allowed 5 or more sacks in 6 games this year. They're 2-4 in those games, and they're 2-1 when they allow 4 or less sacks to Sam Howell. So I also believe he leads the NFL in sacks responsible by the quarterback, if you look at that stat by Pro Football Focus. So
he loves to hold on to the ball. That was
does.
something that was a knock on him at North Carolina. Now, I didn't think it was – I'm feeling pretty good about this. Sam Howell was a guy that I thought the Seahawks should consider late in the first round a couple years ago. You can go back and listen to the podcast. I know you and I talked about it. So I guess I'm not surprised he's having this success that he's having.
Yeah, and he's absolutely a threat in this game. And if you give him that chance to go downfield, he has that zero fear thing. Well, he'll just push the ball downfield, and he's got some very talented receivers that'll make plays for him. So you got to pressure him. You got to capitalize on him holding on to the football. And I think this is a game not quite like to the Giants level, but you'd like to give some pretty nice sacks statistics in this game.
Yeah, I like the Baker Mayfield comparison that you made, other than I think Sam Howell is already a better quarterback than what Baker Mayfield ever has been. But there's similarities in style, and he does have that gunslinger in him. And you could see it at North Carolina on tape. It didn't result in a ton of interceptions, but he has thrown 9 this year. He's thrown 9 picks, and some of that, it's his first full year as a starter. You're going to make those young player mistakes, but he's got a little Brett Favre in him. He likes to gun the football into tight spaces. He trusts his arm. He trusts his receivers, and he's paid for that. The Commanders have also coughed up the football as much as anybody in the NFL this year from a fumble standpoint. This is a team, as high-powered as they are, they have hurt themselves with turnovers. So from a Seahawks standpoint, you got a couple turnovers in Baltimore. The offense couldn't do anything with those turnovers. But this is a game that you've got to be able to get, in my opinion, at least 1 interception and 1 fumble recovery. This has been a very giving, it's Thanksgiving season after all, this has been a very giving offense for the Commanders. As productive as they have been from a yardage standpoint, they've had some games they put a lot of points on the board. They've also given up a lot of turnovers. So the Seahawks have got to find a way to do that against an offensive line that, quite frankly, isn't very good. And you got a quarterback that is willing to sit in there and wait till the last minute, and he'll burn you if you don't get after him. But at the same time, holding on to the football that long and as much of a gunslinger as he can be, that combination, it can lead to a lot of opportunities for turnovers. The Seahawks have to capitalize when he makes those mistakes.
And they also need to be a bit disciplined and responsible, because they do utilize running backs and tight ends in the passing game very well. So you can't allow them to hurt you. You got Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson Jr., who are both, I think, fine running backs in this league, especially they have the after the catch and, third down, coming out of the backfield skills. I think combined, I'm looking at the stats in front of me, combined those 2 running backs, Gibson and Robinson, have 39 catches for north of 200 or 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like they can make you pay in the passing game out of the backfield.
Yeah, and Logan Thomas as well at tight end. He's had some of his biggest games in the past against the Seahawks. So you can't this is a team that's got a ton of talent at receiver. You're willing to give up a few big plays against those guys, and you're confident in your corners and your safeties to be able to hold up against them. But you cannot let Antonio Gibson rip off a couple big catches after the catchability through the roof with his receiver background. You can't let Logan Thomas dominate you. This can't be a game where the running backs and tight ends end up beating you. You have to force their stars to beat you, I think, in this game, the Terry McLaurins of the world. And McLaurin is a really darn good receiver, an underrated one at that. And he's a guy that can take the top off a defense. He can beat you in the intermediate, but I'd be more comfortable with seeing a guy that I already know is a stud like that beat you than letting the running backs and tight ends beat you at home. So I do think that is a huge key for the Seahawks defense. You cannot let those guys get loose after the catch, particularly Antonio Gibson with that 4.3 speed. He is a guy that's been a little bit in the doghouse because of fumbles, but when he gets the ball in his hand, he holds on to it. He is a dangerous weapon out of the backfield, both as a runner and a pass catcher. Robinson's a pretty solid receiver, just not the dynamic athlete that Antonio Gibson is. Coming up next, we're going to look at our weekly picks to click and, of course, our game predictions. Did the Seahawks move to 6-3, or is there a blowout hangover at Lumen Field and the Commanders come to town and pull the upset? Don't go away. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Now for a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Life can be full of twists and turns and throw a few wrenches at you when you least expect it. So it's important to show yourself through it all and put a focus on your mental health. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Therapy worked wonders for me when I was battling depression earlier in my professional career, but don't just take my word for it. Having someone in your corner to guide you when you're struggling to navigate obstacles is invaluable. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online and available to people worldwide. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you. BetterHelp is a great way to invest in yourself, and BetterHelp has a special offer for our listeners. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. As your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Now it is time for our weekly picks to click and game predictions. A lot on the line for both teams this weekend as the Seahawks look to improve to 6-3 and stay atop the NFC West, while the Commanders are looking to get back to 500 and be right in the thick of things in the wild card race. It's certainly a big game with playoff ramifications in Week 10. Nick, looking at the Seahawks this week, and you and I have gone through some really bad droughts with these picks to click the last few weeks. I was having such a good season, and suddenly I started turning into the Seahawks offense. I have not been able to get anything going the last couple of weeks, but from an offensive standpoint, who's the player you're looking at as your pick to click against the Commanders that needs to have a big game for Seattle to get the win?
Well, I'm going to go a little bit off cuff here, a little bit off the off the beaten path. And we talked about our scoring system, how offensive linemen can come into play. I think it's 1 or 0 pressures get you some points, and a 75 grade or higher on Pro Football Focus is our metric. I'm going to go Charles Cross. I know that we talked, I know the main problem is the interior line, which this is me not being super optimistic about that situation right now. I'm not picking them to click. I hope they improve. But, with James Smith-Williams, Casey Toohill, F.A. Obata, those names don't scare me as much as Chase Young and Montez Sweat for Washington. So I'd like for Charles Cross to just take care of his business. You don't need to have this sparkling, amazing game against these, elite pass rushers. Just take care of your own, take care of your business, keep that blind side clean. Hopefully they can clean up some stuff in the interior. But Charles Cross, especially, it's time to play like a top 10 tackle. It's time to be that kind of player. And while he's been solid mostly, we haven't quite seen that next step yet. And I would love for a game like this to be the beginning of that.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a player on the outside that needs to start playing like the top 10 caliber receiver that he can be. And I know DK Metcalf has been nursing a hip injury. And as we mentioned earlier, it looks like that's going to be one of those things he's going to be nursing the rest of the season, or at least for most of the rest of the season. He is healthier than he was a couple of weeks ago, though, when he had to sit out a game. And you look at the numbers, he had 14 targets 2 weeks ago against the Cleveland Browns, caught 5 passes. And a lot of that is not DK Metcalf's fault. There have been a lot of bad throws from Geno Smith, or there's been fade routes that just are low percentage anyway that were not going to be easy catches for him to make. But then this last week, 4 targets, he only gets 1 catch, but he turned it into a 50-yard reception. It was the only splash play the Seahawks had on offense the entire day in Baltimore. I look at this secondary. This is not the Ravens secondary, not even close, polar opposites. The Commanders have given up the 3rd most passing yards in the NFL, the 3rd most air yards. They're 2nd in explosive pass plays in the NFL. As you mentioned, 22 pass attempts of 25-plus yards they have given up this year. DK Metcalf should be drooling coming into this game. So I'm going really bold on this one, Nick. I think that DK gets 7 catches for 108 yards, and not just once, but twice finds the end zone. This is a game, him going up against somebody like Emmanuel Forbes, who I think is a good young corner, but Emmanuel Forbes weighs half what DK Metcalf does. Like, Metcalf should be able to eat him for lunch. He is faster. He is much bigger. This should be a game that you can take the top off the defense. You can create some yards after the catch. I think this is the game DK breaks out a little bit and starts to play like he's capable of, because I don't think the last 2 weeks the struggles have really been his fault. I think Geno Smith's going to be able to get the ball to him in this game, though. And I'm looking forward to seeing number 14 go off against a pass defense that has really struggled since week 1. And that's part of the reason Chase Young and Montez Sweat are not here anymore. They started to sell because this defense has struggled so much. Now, switching gears, Commanders that we've talked about, this is an offense that can put up a lot of points in a hurry. They've got a talented passing attack. They got a couple of good running backs. Who is your defensive pick to click for the Seahawks trying to slow down Sam Howell and company?
Well, after watching the likes of, Darrell Taylor get mugged in the run game last week against the Ravens, I want to see a little bit of a change up, and this is definitely another change up for me. I'm going to go Dareke Hall, second round pick, rookie. I want to see more snaps from him. I'd love to see north of 30 snaps, maybe even more than that from him this week. I think he's the better run defender. He's just looking at him, he's just thicker. He's more built to defend the run game. He had 5 pressures against the Giants. I mean, I guess my grandma had 5 pressures against the Giants, but he's got that in his game. But I think he's a bit more of a balanced player on the edge than a Darrell Taylor is, where he's not a liability in the run game, and especially a team like the Commanders, who, they air it out, but if they can get a rhythm on the ground, that spells really bad for the Seahawks. So Dareke Hall, I'd like to see him keep continue to eke himself into this lineup and maybe lead that little group in snaps.
Yeah, I think Dareke Hall has a chance to potentially be a starter across from Boye Mafe here in the next few weeks. I think that we are approaching that time because the other two ends, Frank Clark, the first 2 games back, has been really quiet. I haven't necessarily seen a lot of bad plays, but he hasn't really been making impact plays either. And Darrell Taylor, he just can't get the job done against the run. An opponent's game plan for that, they attack him when he comes in. The Ravens attacked everybody, but they certainly went after number 52 last week. So they're going to need him. I'm going to go with a guy. This will be the 3rd time I picked him. He hasn't clicked in either the first 2 times, but I am going to keep rolling the dice on Riq Woolen because we know the talent is there. And as Pete Carroll was talking about earlier this week, he just hasn't quite been able to figure things out this year because of the lost offseason and training camp coming off the knee injury. There's been a few glimpses that he's his rookie self, but we just haven't seen him put it together. If there's a game where he can put it together, though, I mean, this Washington team has really good receivers, so this is going to be a test. At the same time, Sam Howell, he likes to chuck the ball downfield, and if there is a strength that stands out above all the others for Riq Woolen, this is not a guy that's easy to beat over the top. And so I think this is the game that Riq Woolen comes through with an interception, a couple pass breakups against an offense that, as I mentioned earlier, Sam Howell's thrown 9 interceptions. This is a team that will turn the football over. All it takes in this instance is Howell getting a little bit overconfident with that arm, with the receivers he's got. Woolen using that 4.2 speed and being able to get under the football and intercept it. So I think he gets a pick and 2 pass breakups. And if he's able to do that, that gives the Seahawks a really good chance to win this football game. Now the big question is, will they win it? The Seahawks are actually 6.5-point favorites, according to our friends at FanDuel. I'm actually surprised they are favored by that much coming off the loss that they just had in Baltimore, and the fact the Commanders won. And I know they beat the Patriots, who are one of the worst teams in the NFL this year, but nonetheless, I thought that the spread would be a little bit tighter here. Do you see the Seahawks covering that 6.5-point spread, or do you see the Commanders cutting into that and keeping this close or even pulling the upset?
Well, I saw a little nugget that the Commanders are actually 4-0 against the spread as a road underdog. So, they're scrappy. They're just, that I know that's cliche. But I see them kind of in that same scenario. I've watched both games of theirs against the Eagles with my dad wanting to strangle someone within arm's length of him. That's how they make. That's how the Commanders. Yeah, exactly. They just have that effect on some teams, and they just have found ways to hang around. So I think that that's going to happen. I do think that they are going to cover. They're going to, be within that 6.5 points. I think that's pretty rich. I agree, especially with how the Seahawks looked in Baltimore. Granted, this is at home, and I think there's a bit of, get that bad taste out of your mouth. I do see the Seahawks winning 27-23. I think that the Commanders get a few big plays, a few, chunk plays, and get theirs, especially Sam Howell. He's going to keep trying those big cash money plays, and maybe a few of them work, but I think also 1 or 2 won't go his way. And like you said, with maybe Riq Woolen cashing in on that. So I think the Seahawks do win. It's close, it's tight, it's uncomfortable, but I think give me the home team with that advantage.
Yeah, I have a 4-point difference for my score as well. And maybe I'm going to get burned for this because the weather's not looking overly great in the forecast coming up this weekend in Seattle, but both these teams have played in wet conditions. They both have stud receivers. And I think Sam Howell is one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. We're seeing it week in, week out, and just how gutsy he is, the moxie that he plays with. And he's surprisingly athletic as a scrambler. And that could be an issue the Seahawks have to deal with this week. So I think this is the week the Seahawks offense, I haven't seen anything that suggests to me this is coming, but there's got to be a point where this offense erupts a little bit. And if there's an opponent to do it against, the Commanders don't have their two top pass rushers. They traded them away. They already were not a good defense with those two players. This secondary has been ripe for big plays all year long. The linebackers have been inconsistent. If there's a game they can put points on the board, it is this week. And I think they're going to have to, because I think Commanders will find ways to score points too with Eric Bieniemy at the controls as the offensive coordinator. He's proving he doesn't need Andy Reid to be a prolific offensive coordinator. They're doing a great job scheming things up and inspiring confidence in Sam Howell. But I think the Seahawks win 34-30. I think this is more of an offensive contest. The Commanders, that's how they have to win games. And the Seahawks, they're going to have to find a way to start winning some games with that offense. Their defense has been so good most of the season, but you've got to be able to put points on the board with the weapons they've got. Geno Smith needs more help. This is the game that I think the Seahawks can find a way to get that done. And maybe it isn't the biggest statement because of who they're playing against, because the Commanders' defense has been rough most of the season. But that's all the more reason. Go put points on the board. I think this is the game the Seahawks offense wakes up. But they're going to need those points in a tight contest against a much better team than their record suggests in the Washington Commanders. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up on Sunday, a few hours after the final whistle at Lumen Field, I will have my weekly post-game show. We'll have our offense, defense, special teams, game balls, 3 up, 3 down, key storylines, and much more. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.